Greg here, Party Foul. I'm Scott behind the camera again, and I'm going to sort of pick up and talk about etiquette, take off from where Scott talked about it. Very important topic, how you play with your opponent. And I'm going to specifically talk about something I like to call D&C, or declare and confirm. And I'm also going to talk about something called intent. And that's a little bit wrapped up in declare and confirm, but it's also a separate topic. So it's part of etiquette, it's how you play the game. And I'm talking about like metaphysically, but what you're doing when you're playing a game of Warmachine is that both players are creating a shared understanding of the game state. It's like magic. There's like magic happening on the tabletop between you and your opponent. And so the most important thing required to maintain this magic of a shared understanding of the game state is communication. And so when I think about communications, I think about the 3 C's. And that's clear, to be concise, and to be constant. That is, to be constantly communicating. A game should be like a constant dialogue between the players as they first declare the desire to alter the game state by moving a model or making an attack, and then confirmation of that declaration from their opponent, followed by the execution of that declaration which alters the game state. That means you do not alter the game state by moving a model until your opponent agrees it is a possible change. This can be complicated, as you don't want to slow the game down by proxying every move with bases and stuff like that. But when things get close and there's a possibility of disagreement, you should immediately do D&C, declare and confirm, and use proxy bases and precision measuring tools. A lot of times, if you just say, I want this model here to charge right here, are you okay with that? And the opponent says, yes, that's definitely legal, then you just do it, right? A lot of times it's very simple like that. Or your opponent will just say, I think it's a little tight, can we use a proxy base? And that's cool, right? Remember, you need to cooperate with your opponent to move the game along, and that's an important mindset to get into. You and your opponent are creating something on the tabletop with existing rules and all that type of stuff, but you have to work with your opponent. And that doesn't mean you're not playing a competitive game, it means you have to have a constant agreement as to what the table state is. Think of it as though you require your opponent's permission to alter the game state. That means your opponent has to agree that what you're doing is possible. Alright, so this breaks down into a number of important steps that players need to internalize. The first is habitual communication. That means doing everything I already mentioned. Constantly communicating your intents and what you want it to happen on the tabletop with your opponent. Constantly. Like whenever you watch a good game of Warmachine, there's a constant conversation going on as to what's happening on the tabletop. Second, making your intent clear. At the start of the game, or at the start of the turn or an important action, sometimes it's better to clarify what your goals are. And I've done this in a game before, or a number of games before, where if I think that what I'm going to do might surprise my opponent, I like to sort of get out in the open, because it's not like they might not have anything they can do about it. But if I feel that this is a possibility, then I'll just declare it. I might say, this turn, I'm going to try to take Mulg and the Axer. Those are the 2 models I'm going to get. And this is going to be the generalities of how I'm going to do it, so that my opponent has a sense of what I'm trying to accomplish. And then I will start to do my declarations, activations, and all that type of things. Okay, so third, the importance of body language. This isn't usually a big issue, but remember that this is a game is a shared state, and it's your responsibility to present your declarations as politely and non-offensively as possible. And that includes inaggressive body language, don't frown, raise your voice in an angry manner, point aggressively, hit the table, cross your arms in front of you, do any of that little huffy stuff, or chuck your dice meanly or something like that. Watch the tone of your voice, watch your body language. You're trying to be polite with your opponent, and that can be a lot more important than winning a game. All right. Fourthly, after making a declaration, look at your opponent and observe that he agrees and accepts your declaration and that the change in game state is shared before proceeding. All right? I know that's the case. Some people, you know, we're all nerds, we're all a little shy about social interaction and stuff like that, but try to make eye contact, try to look at your opponent occasionally. Don't just always look down at your guys and be like, I want to do this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. You got to look at your opponent. This is a bit of a social game, right? You got to engage with him. Alright, so how do you deal with an opponent who doesn't use D&C? That's declare and confirm. First off, if you haven't played this player before and you are concerned that they don't use D&C, clarify how you do things at the beginning of the game when discussing terrain. That's a great point to sort of get your habitual standard things that you do out. I know that Scott, whenever he plays somebody, he says, you know, I use the STR rule, the Scott Talarico rule, and that's if the die is not firmly flat down, like completely, he re-rolls it, even if it's a little bit cocked. That's sort of his sort of thing, just so his opponent knows how his dice are. So if you're concerned that your opponent is a little slippery on the whole like proxying bottle basis and stuff like that before making an important charge, tell him. You know, if there's any important charges that you're going to make or any important model placements, can I just ask you to use a proxy base throughout the game so that we both agree that it's possible. Just get it out there in the open right away. Okay, demonstrate. Start your game by doing declare and confirm for everything so that your opponent sees and understands that you will, and then they will naturally adopt declare and confirm as well. And I mean, you can get really silly about it in your first turn, like, you know, I'm going to activate these Doom Reavers. The Doom Reavers are going to run and then measure and move. And that's very normal for people to do that, but be very clear about it if you're concerned the person is not a good D&C player. Thirdly, if an important charge or line of sight thing comes up, catch them beforehand with a reminder. When he says, okay, I'm going to activate my Bane Riders, you can say, can I just ask you to use a proxy base for any important charges for them or for all the charges, because I'm concerned that some of them may be kind of tricky and placement might be difficult. And your opponent will be like, oh yeah, sure, fine, that's great. That can get a little, I know that when you get down in clock, you're like, and play can get a little sloppy. Don't be that guy. If you're down in clock and you're trying to do something important, do it properly. Okay? Use your proxy base, use your precision measuring tools. There's nothing worse than getting sloppy and the result being questionable as a result of that. So, how do you deal with a situation that didn't use declare and confirm? That means, like, say your opponent did something and then afterwards you're suddenly like, I don't think that was possible. Okay, first off, realize that you have an obligation to communicate to your opponent. Always that you have an obligation to communicate to your opponent. It's not cool to ambush them with a, oh man, I don't think that you could have made that charge after the model has been moved. Be a gentleman, be alert, and catch your opponent with a, can you use a proxy for any tight charges this turn? Or can you, just as he's starting to activate his Warp Wolf Stalker, can we use a proxy for that, please? I'm concerned that it might be a little tight. Failings in agreement of the game state are ultimately a failure of both players. Once a model is moved, it's impossible to reset things, and it can get kind of tricky because, like I said, if you weren't alert and you weren't asking him to use a proxy base and you moved it, well, that becomes very questionable and you're probably going to get a judge involved, and I don't know how the judge is going to rule because he doesn't know what the game state was before the model was moved. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the judge, but you have a responsibility to be communicating with your opponent. So, what happens if there's an accidental altering of the game state? And this doesn't necessarily involve declare and confirm, but I thought it was an important thing to cover with it. Sometimes a player bumps a model. In this case, the commonly accepted result is that the charge or shot, if it was questionable at all, is immediately found in the player who didn't bump the model. So if I had this model here, and I was like, I want this model to charge Karchev, and then while I was gesticulating around wildly, I accidentally bumped the model, and now I don't know where he was and whether or not it could have been a successful charge. And if my opponent was like, I really don't think you could have made that charge, then the charge will fail because you bumped the model. You altered the game state unwillingly or willingly, doesn't matter. You automatically fail that charge. After you place the model back and confirm with your opponent that the positioning is accurate and acceptable, that's after you bumped it, okay? So if you bump a model and it's not during an important charge or something like that, when you replace the model, just confirm with your opponent. Is this okay? If you feel this is where the position where it was, that's fine. Okay, lastly, I'm going to talk about intent. This is something that goes hand in hand with declare and confirm, and it can be interpreted in two ways. First off, declaring that a model's placement or game state is something that is not physically possible with the model. Like, say I wanted these two models to be base to base, or maybe this might be better if I was with Karchev and this guy. I want these guys to be base to base, but it's not actually possible to get the models base to base. There's a gap. You just do it, and you say, my intent is to have Karchev and his Clamjack base to base, okay? And your opponent will be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Sometimes maybe it'd be like, well, can we just turn the model so that its placement is actually accurate? And be like, okay, sure, that's what I'll do. I'll just turn them like that, but the intent is to have his facing like this so that he's not got rear arc on so-and-so or something like that. And your opponent's like, okay, that's cool. So that's one form of intent. The other form is when a player wishes to accomplish something and wants the other player to confirm that it's possible, even if it may not be possible from the exact position of the model. An example of this might be, let's just say we got these guys here and stuff like that. Maybe there's a hill or other models in the way or something, and as you're moving your arc node, you'd be like, I'm going to activate my arc node. I want to move it so that the intention is for it to have line of sight to Karchev, and I'm going to put him here. Would you agree that that is in line of sight? And your opponent can be like, yep, that looks good, you're fine. That's another form of intent, where there may be some sort of question. Is it tight? Maybe these guys are like really tight. Is there some overlap? That type of thing. You know, you have to confirm and check that with your opponent, or to make sure that that game state is okay. The best thing that I've heard when it relates to intent and declare and confirm, I think Jay from Chain Attack said this, and these are not the exact words, is that if something is possible, then I want to assist my opponent in making it possible. And that means that if your opponent declares something and you know it to be possible, then you have an obligation to make it be possible. You don't have a right to obstruct that possibility just because you don't like the results of it. Okay, so summarize, communicate, use, declare, and confirm and intent at all time, and you'll have a cleaner and more enjoyable game for you and your opponent, and you'll be a more respected War Machine player. So, enjoy.